probably heard that California is a great state to engage in a surrogacy journey. But how does surrogacy work in California exactly? Well, stick around and we'll talk about just that. Hello, I'm Corlendos Scott, a surrogacy attorney in Los Angeles, and that simply means that my practice revolves around representing hopeful parents who are growing their families through surrogacy, as well as representing surrogates who are carrying babies on behalf of hopeful parents. Now, in today's episode, we're going to talk about surrogacy requirements in California. We're going to look at the surrogacy process in California, and I'll break down what California law says about surrogacy. So let's dive in. Now, we'll get into the legal issues later on in this video, just hold your horses. But first, I want to talk about surrogacy requirements. You know, the rules and best practices that aren't necessarily laws, but they are still rules that are followed by reputable professionals in the surrogacy world. And just so we're clear, California does not provide any of these types of requirements, so you'll find that some of the standards and best practices may vary minimally from clinic to clinic and from surrogacy agency to surrogacy agency, but there are some foundational principles that most all surrogacy professionals will agree on. You'll find that most of the requirements surrounding surrogacy, outside of the laws, that is, they're disseminated by the professional organizations involved in the process. These are organizations like ASRM, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, the FDA, that's the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, even SART, that's the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology. You also have CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control, and AATB, that's the American Association of Tissue Banks. Now, these agencies and institutions, they provide guidelines to IVF clinics that these clinics can rely upon when they're deciding how to provide the highest standard of care to all of the people who are undergoing surrogacy arrangements. Now, these guidelines advise surrogacy professionals on topics like the proper screening and testing affecting the genetic parents and the surrogate. It talks about ways to reduce the possibilities of complications and risks. It covers how to address complex medical situations and psychological issues between surrogates and intended parents. It even sometimes goes into how to ensure that donors and surrogates are healthy enough to undergo assisted reproduction. It also covers how to identify risks based on the medical history of the parties. Now, it's through organizations like ASRM that we get guidance on what factors should be considered when qualifying a woman to serve as a surrogate or gestational carrier. Now, the typical age of a successful surrogate candidate is anywhere between 21 to 40 years old, and maybe sometimes a little bit older even, depending on how healthy she is and, her specific situation. Also, you have to make sure that your candidate has had a previous successful pregnancy and delivery. Yeah, to be a gestational carrier, you have to at least be able to show that you can carry. You want to see that she's done this before and she's done it successfully without problems or complications. Now, somebody might ask, how many pregnancies are too many pregnancies? Can there be too many pregnancies? Well, we all know that pregnancy and childbirth puts a lot of strain on a person's body and that a woman goes through a lot of things throughout the process of pregnancy. So you want to make sure that you're looking at a candidate with around a maximum of 5 vaginal births or 3 cesarean section births. Now, another one of the physical requirements is a healthy BMI, it's body mass index. And it's not that we're body shaming people or that people who weigh above a certain amount are lesser human beings. It's really because the risks. Remember, we don't want to put women at unnecessary risks. And unfortunately, BMI factors into the possibility for things like gestational diabetes and other medical issues that could put the potential candidate at risk. Another one of the guidelines or requirements that you'll find when you're talking about physical requirements is, oddly enough, no tattoos or body piercings in the recent past. Now, I'd say up to a year. Now, it may seem like a weird request, but the reason for that is because it's possible to transfer diseases or infections through needles. And while most tattoo parlors and piercing parlors are probably good, there's a possibility that some are not. And you wouldn't want to take the risk of having a potential infection that could jeopardize a pregnancy. Now, there's also the psychological requirements. A surrogate needs to pass a psychological screening that determines that she's mentally healthy and that she understands the emotional aspects of the surrogacy journey, and most of all, understands that the baby she is carrying will not and is not her own. Now, a surrogacy candidate also should have a stable home life. In the best case scenario, she has a support system and a good family unit around her. But in no event would they want someone whose life is surrounded by drama or anything like that, because it adds to the potential for complications. And that's both psychologically and sometimes physically if there's an abusive situation or something of that nature. And here's one that isn't so much of a requirement, written requirement at least, but a surrogate candidate should have financial stability. Yes, financial stability. But Corlandos, surrogates get compensated, so what do finances matter? Well, yeah, outside of altruistic surrogacy arrangements, compensated surrogacy does exist, and most surrogates do get compensated for what they do for the hopeful parents. But that compensation shouldn't be their sole form of income. Even if they're a stay-at-home mother, they can't be depending solely on the compensation from the surrogacy arrangement to make their lives possible. That's one of the things that people who are against surrogacy always rant about. They think you're taking advantage of these women who wouldn't otherwise be able to live but for your monthly surrogacy allowance. So your surrogate shouldn't be depending on government assistance or for the surrogate compensation to be her only compensation or her only source of living. Now, another aspect of surrogacy requirements is that they provide a basis for justifying a hopeful parent even working with a donor or surrogate. Now, every reputable surrogacy professional, and even some state laws, will require that there be some medical condition that produces a need for the surrogacy. Now, that can be a medical condition that prevents the hopeful parent or parents from having children outside of an assisted reproduction process. It can also be the presence of a potential critical risk to the mother or the child during pregnancy. It could also be the result of multiple fertility treatment failures where the medical professional has no confidence that another attempt would produce fruitful results. The ethical reason why we need a medical reason to proceed with surrogacy is again because of the risk it poses to the surrogate. Undertaking surrogacy requires a woman to place her body at risk where she otherwise would not. So it's about not placing another woman's life at risk unless it's medically necessary. Let's talk about the process of surrogacy in California. But before we do, scroll down right beneath this video and hit that like button so that YouTube knows to share this with more people. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe so you won't miss any of my upcoming videos. And if you know someone who's looking to grow their family through surrogacy, then go ahead and share it with them. Earn some major friend points. Okay, let's look at the big three themes, you can call them, in the surrogacy process in California. First, we have surrogacy agencies and their requirements. Now, most reputable surrogacy agencies put their potential surrogate candidates through a preliminary screening process where they review their previous pregnancy medical records, they gather information about the surrogate and her health, things like her age and information about her living arrangements. The really good agencies, they also will conduct background checks and look into the candidate's financial stability prior to even presenting them to you to match. Then we have the medical requirements. Now, I covered some of the main medical requirements earlier, so I won't rehash them. But as far as the process is concerned, typically the candidate proceeds to the fertility doctor in order to receive a thorough screening once you've decided to match with the surrogate based on your, initial review of her preliminary screening results, and you've had the chance to meet with her. Now, this medical screening is the basis for whether you're going to move to the next step of the process, which is entering into a legally binding surrogacy contract with the surrogate candidate. Now, keep in mind that the psychological evaluation is one of the components that the medical screening process takes into consideration, so you're not leaving that by the wayside. So once the medical screening is out of the way, the next step is to enter into a contract with your surrogate candidate, where the rights and the responsibilities of each of you guys are clearly defined and clearly agreed upon. Now, this surrogacy contract is going to cover a multitude of things. It's going to include a recital of the risks and the responsibilities of each party. It's going to talk about how the financial aspects are going to be handled. It's going to talk about agreements around selective reduction and termination of the pregnancy, and even who makes important decisions relating to the pregnancy and the childbirth. Now, while we're talking about the contract, let's finish up by covering surrogacy laws in California. Now, I believe that surrogacy laws in California make it the friendliest surrogacy state in the U.S. Not only does California have case law, that's where a court considered a topic and then stated a decision. It's called a ruling. But California also has statutory law. Now, statutory law is where a state's legislature writes a bill, votes that bill into law, and the governor signs it into law. And that law goes into the state's books, so to speak. Now, in California, surrogacy is regulated by our California Family Code sections 7960 through 7962. And in those sections, it defines the terms surrounding assisted reproduction, it instructs us on how the funds for surrogacy must be handled, and it even dictates what the minimum requirements are for a surrogacy contract. Now, in addition to those code sections, we have two important cases that provide us with some guidance. We have a case called Johnson v. Calvert, and that case said that a gestational carrier is not the parent of the baby she delivers for the intended parents. Important case for hopeful parents. Then we have Bazanka v. Bazanka, or Bazanka versus Bazanka. And this case said that when a couple consents to IVF by unknown donors or anonymous donors, and that subsequent embryo that was created with the anonymous donor's gametes is put into a surrogate, the couple are the legal parents of the offspring and not the donor and not the surrogate. Another important case if you're a hopeful parent. And that's why California is said to have a wide body of surrogacy or assisted reproduction law. But we're not finished. We also have California Family Code section 7633. And that section allows hopeful parents to be declared the legal parents of the child by court order, get this, even before the baby is born. That's an important one. And lastly, we can't forget about California Family Code section 7613, and that provides hopeful parents and donors with a huge protection. And that protection is that neither a sperm donor nor an egg donor will be declared the parent of a child born through donation when you do it the right way, when the sperm or the egg is provided according to the legal definition of assisted reproduction. So important, it lets you rest easily knowing that that donor can't come back 5 years from now and knock on your door and say, "That's my baby." No way. The law says they can. So to the question of how does surrogacy work in California, I guess my simple answer would be pretty darn well. So if you're looking to grow your family, I have something special for you. It's a free gift. It's called the Surrogacy Roadmap, and it walks you through each step of the surrogacy process from beginning to end. So if you want that, simply click the link below to be taken to thesurrogacyroadmap.com and get your hands on that valuable resource for free.